Welcome back to the show, everybody. Yeah, we've got a bench full of oil filters, and I think I've got a really good oil filter episode, about 80% of the way built. I'm just waiting on one key delivery that is supposed to happen tomorrow afternoon. Until I get those pieces, I just can't turn the camera on it. And I'd really like to keep going on that before we get too far off into the weeds with other things, because we've got some pretty decent momentum built for that after the last episode here. So in the meantime, I've been trying my best to hold off on getting into the 3-point lift here. You all should be pretty well up on the story behind this after the last few episodes, and I've dug out the rest of the hitch system that was on X231 when we got it. There's a lot of destruction going on down there, but the 3-point lift stuff on these early 445s is really odd. It's really confusing, and a lot of things changed in a very short amount of time. And the more I learn about this stuff, the more I find out, the more I question my own plan, we'll put it that way. So maybe I've just entered into some analysis paralysis because I've just been too consumed by it. But I think this episode, it'll be a decent filler, if you will, while we're waiting for the rest of the oil filter parts. We can take this opportunity to really delve into the 3-point systems on these 445s, and I can get you all up to speed on what my line of thinking is, and I'd also like to hear your opinions on it as well. Maybe if I lay everything out for you all, you may see something that I'm not. So if you want to get all nerdy with it, you've come to the right place. Keep watching. All right, the perfect way to start is with a comment left by Sean Stample a couple episodes back. And they said, "I'm sure you went back to the farm where all the prototype tractors lived. Were there any traces of the old 3-point or no? Do you know why they would have switched to the newer style hitch?" Now, I personally never set foot on that old prototype farm while it was still in its heyday, so to speak. When the scrappers came in and cleaned all that stuff out, I was probably 7 or 8 years old, so I really wasn't aware of, goings on like that at the time. My grandfather and senior had both been out there several times, and they both told me that after the scrappers cleaned it out, it was literally cleaned out. Like, there wasn't even a stray bolt left on the ground. So that really makes it difficult to try to go back and piece together any of X231's past, because so much of it is simply gone forever. But it is no secret that X231 underwent several design changes while it was still at the factory. And the biggest proof we have of that is the traces of the massive rework they did to the ampli-torque high-low range system. The archive photos show a secondary control lever that lived right here in the dash, came out this direction, that was deleted. Here is where the bottom of that lever would have pivoted, where I have that cork right now. And we've talked about the archive photos showing a cross pivot piece here with this stop right there. It went down to a vertical style fork to engage or disengage the ampli-torque, and it also jumpered a linkage over to this shaft right here that somehow actuated the main clutch at the same time. And while it was at the factory, of course, they deleted all of that stuff. They welded in these pivot collars on each side. Here's evidence of the other one over here. And they also added this whole lever with the stop that is not in the original archive photos, and turned the ampli-torque system into a horizontal actuation fork system, very similar to what the production tractors had. So this is proof right here that the archive photos don't show everything that X231 was while it was at the factory. What was on the back of this tractor for a hitch system when it left, though, we will never know. All that we know for certain is that this archive photo shows Minneapolis-Moline's first attempt at a 3-point hitch system. So this is design level 0001. Everything starts right here. Just to break it down real quick, and so much of this stuff is so odd, I can't even really say what it did, but we've got an interesting looking riveted construction drawbar swing plate. Above that, we have this round tube, and I believe this tube was hollow in the center and a shaft passed through it. That shaft would have had these drop-down arms welded to it on each side, and those drop-downs had the pins that mounted the lower three-point control arms. So these lower three-point arms look like they are sort of an I-beam style construction. They look really, really different. Moving on up, the vertical lift rods. Each one has a height adjustment hand crank, manual crank on it, which is odd because every other three-point system I've run across only has an adjustable height crank on one of the rods. So that was very interesting. Our main control, our main three-point housing, I should say, looks quite a bit narrower than any of the production models, but the rock shaft looks a lot wider than anything else I've ever seen. What I can't really figure out, though, is how our draft sensing mechanism worked, and I believe all of this stuff that's on the outside, this vertical linkage, is part of their draft sensing mechanism. I think it was all external on this hitch. It was very crude, but it looks to me like where these lower three-point arms pin onto those drop-down brackets, they would pivot if we had a cross shaft that went through that round tube. So as they would pivot, we can see a pin here at the back with a vertical link that comes up to this piece that is just inside of the main lift arm, and it looks like this piece would rotate on the rock shaft independent from the lift arm. So if we sensed or encountered a heavy load at the three-point implement, it would possibly roll that, these three-point arms forward, and then that would pull down and pivot this piece downward, which would possibly be keyed into something that did something else inside of the lift housing. Or we've also got this other curious vertical piece that looks like it's welded to that round tube, and the face of it here looks like it's rough torch cut to me. It looks like it bolts or pins to another vertical linkage that goes onto this, which appears to be pinned to a plunger rod or two that go to some kind of a valve block that is next to the main housing. We have a mystery knob up here. I just really can't say how most of this even worked. And to even try to recreate this with just this one view from the rear would be almost impossible. You could probably build a non-functioning clone of it to a certain extent, but it would be pretty hard to do anything that would actually appear to be credible. So now that we know where things started out with X231, I'll show you where things ended up, at least up to the point where we got it. So these two green primered brackets, they are the main drawbar and three-point arm brackets. They attach to each back corner of the rear case, and both of these are basically dead ringers for production 445 brackets. What's odd about them, though, no numbers, nothing cast, nothing stamped in. So they're right for a 445, yet they aren't at the same time. So possibly these could have been design level upgrades that actually were put onto X231 before it left the factory. Then we go back to the drawbar swing plate right here. It has these holes in it that would bolt to the drawbar brackets, not riveted like the original. And once again, this is shaped very much like a production 445 swing plate, but it has a few key differences, and it's made out of slightly thicker material and no numbers. So once again, almost right, but not quite. Lower lift arms next, and this is where we get into levels of damage that I have not seen on another Minneapolis Moline. Poor X231, but we have a mismatched set, okay? This one is later than 445. It's not even correct for a 445, and it is all production. There's nothing prototype about it. They've went and hogged the ball socket clear out of the back end, and it bends and jogs. It's horrible, all right? The one on this side would be correct for a 445. It has a nasty bend in it right there. It jogs pretty profoundly, but it's hard to believe that they could damage things like that. Look at that. It's but a lot of these 3-point components had part numbers that were either 10A prefix or 30A. So we have the 30A production right there. So we know this was not a prototype piece. This is what a 445 arm should look like. Perfectly straight. All right. And once again, we got the 30A casting number all over. So yeah, these are probably what X231 is going to end up with. Very nice set right here. I just don't know how you do that to hitches. The vertical rod's now 30A casting numbers on most of these things. Another 30A right there. For the most part, this piece is all production 445. And for the most part, this piece is as well. We'll come back to it in a bit, but this is more like you'd expect to see on a production 445 hitch. We just have the solid vertical rod there, but the one on this side has the manual crank with a detent and a castle nut with pockets. So this is pretty much where X231 ended up. Top link, we've got a 10A right there. We've also got a 10A on the crank lever for it. Pipe wrench has been on it plenty of times, scarred it up. They've broken both of the sockets off of the end. The one on this end looks like it was a little bit more professionally done because we actually have coherent weld beads, and it looks like they were filling it nice and wide right there with a quality rod. The other end is more down on the farm. It's pretty much all pinholes and slag. Why they would have had to weld completely up both sides of that, I don't know. But just the amount of rod that was burned there, unbelievable. The levels of damage to X231's hitch system are just unrivaled. Okay, so between this, where everything started, and this, where everything ended up, there is another part of the story that needs to be told. Bear with me here, but it gets rather interesting. And I'm going to use this very early 445 operator's manual to do it. This manual is in horrible condition. The cover's been well worn, tattered, taped on, but when I saw this number right here written on the cover, I thought, oh, there could be some good stuff in here, and sure enough, there is. So inside the delivery service report for that tractor, the same number, 102-00003. That is the third 445 utility tractor off the line. The delivery date was 10/12/1956, first year of 445 production. And I'll let you in on a little secret. So the very earliest edition operator's manuals typically contain photographs of pre-production experimental stage tractors. And Minneapolis Moline is not the only one that did that. I've even noticed that in my early Caterpillar machine operators manuals, because they need to have these books ready for the first production units that come off the line. So how do you photograph a production unit before it's been built? You use the next closest substitute, which is a pre-production experimental. And there's a difference. X231 is a prototype. It's a bunch of raw ideas thrown together to see if they'll work. An experimental then is still technically a prototype, but it's a much more refined prototype that mirrors the finished design. But still, you can pick up subtle oddities, and sure enough, that early operator's manual did not disappoint. So, we look at pictures of the 3-point lift. We'll start with this one right here, okay? So, we're looking at our full production unit from about the same angle. Notice how the main housing is all solid cast. It's all one piece, all right? Pretty typical. And that's what you're going to find on every production 445 lift. This photo, however, shows a clearly segmented and hand-welded main housing. You can even look at the ears down here, the mounting ears for that top link plate. They've been welded on separately. The top of the housing, inboard of the two heavy weld beads, you can still see some weld spatter that they just painted right over. So clearly a very hand-built main housing. Differs greatly from that production unit. And second photo, we're looking down at it much like that, okay? Same angle, but you can clearly see once again how many weld beads there are. So we had a segmented piece of steel here, we had another one that goes across here, and at the very front edge, right off my thumbnail, looks like a flat piece of steel that went across that your valve block, control block, and piston cylinder all attached to. And very, very different than the one-piece solid main housing. Most of this stuff doesn't look like it changed a lot, but yeah, the pre-production units of the main part, very, very different. And one final photo of that pre-production lift. We're looking at it at the same angle as our main production one here, and the upper lift arms. So the top of it comes out pretty much flat, but then you get to the forked segment out here where the vertical rod would attach, and it angles down. It kind of changes direction a little bit, whereas the full production arms pretty much come up flat, consistent angle, not a lot of change. One other detail too, pre-production unit had that great big breather at the top. They pretty much deleted that and just went with this little vent that further routes into the hydraulic systems. So that's another missing link right there. Pretty interesting, the things you can find in these early manuals. Okay, so why did I spend so much of your time talking about things that no longer exist? Well, I noticed something today on X231's old damaged 3-point arms that I was not aware of prior. I'll show it to you. So I was under the impression that, you know, the arms we know were production, but I also thought both of our vertical rods were production until I looked at this crank lever a bit closer, and I noticed we have a 30X 1343 casting number. And if that was a production piece, it should have been 30A 1128. And this X number is the only one on this whole upper portion. There's nothing else stamped or cast anywhere. The fork down here has the production 30A, but they could have just as well screwed those threads right down into it. For me, this is our missing piece of the puzzle. This is our undeniable proof right here that they did perform design level upgrades to the 3-point system on X231. This piece right here being absolute design level production 445 with the exception of that X number tells me this was made before the first production 445 tractor rolled off the line, which also then tells me all of that early overcomplicated stuff was indeed upgraded to higher level designs before X231 ever left the place. And all that complicated external 3-point draft sensing linkage was likely condensed down and put inside of the 3-point lift unit itself, as we saw in the photos of the pre-production experimental unit, as well as what we have here in the full production unit. So that brings us to the point of me finally asking, if this was your project, how would you proceed? As I see it, we have 3 options. Option number 1, which is I think the least likely to happen, would be to try to replicate that design level 1 overly complicated, absolutely prototype hitch system, which based on the very limited amount of information we have, I don't think could be accomplished to any level of credibility whatsoever. Option number 2, which in light of recent developments has me thinking would be probably the most accurate representation of how X231 probably left the factory, and that would be utilize our smoking gun proof that 3-point system upgrades were done to X231 before it left, along with the other 3 likely prototype components. Finish the arm system out with good production 445 pieces, which for as close as this is to 445 level design, I say stand a pretty good chance of matching what was on there originally. And then create a hybrid lift unit that retains the production valving and piston cylinder, but then incorporates a hand-welded main housing that replicates all the different views that we have of it on that pre-production experimental in the operator's manual. Being that that's where things ended up before the first production units came off the line, tells me that X231's original lift system was probably something like that. And option number 3 then would be what my original plan was, to use certainly this 10X upper portion right here in conjunction with those other 3 bracket pieces finish out with the 445 production arms, and just use the earliest possible 445 full production lift that one could obtain. And yeah, this is kind of an interesting exercise where I thought it was worth doing, because I am trying to get the viewers into the same decision-making mindset that I find myself in with this tractor all the time. And that is, there's just so many different ways you could go with it. There's so much missing history, so many things that we'll likely never know unless we find some never before seen additional archive photos of this unit. I think the majority of that is just simply lost to history. And getting back to the original commenter's question that I included at the very start of this episode, I think the reason why they replaced most of the 3-point lift system on this tractor is because they just simply destroyed all of it, and they just started fitting whatever other pieces they could onto it that worked with whatever pieces they could still use. Yeah, the past that this thing suffered has not done us any favors now either. So am I overthinking this whole thing? Like I said, you could take this 3-point lift system and go down the rabbit hole so far you might never find your way back out. In the short term, I'm definitely going to use that full production lift or hitch, unit. Come on, dude, finish this out. I'll put that on the back of the tractor at least to get a fully functioning hydraulic circulatory system. After we can run it, drive it, prove it out, then I'll decide if we want to go down the hybrid welded up unit route, or if we just keep things intact as they are. But this illustrates the best and the worst part of restoring any prototype. You give this tractor to 20 different people, give them all the same amount of money to spend and the same tools to use, you'll still likely get 20 different end results on the restoration, because there's just so many directions you could go, and what's right and what's wrong. To this day, I still don't know where that line is on this thing. So I hope you all enjoyed this episode. I hope you found it entertaining as well as informative, and I hope to get your feedback. Once again, how far would you take this thing? It can get crazy in a hurry if you let it. So that's all I got for y'all. We'll see you on the next one.